Thanks for joining us and welcome to On the Clock with Caroline Clark. I'm Caroline Clark, and today we're going to be talking with Maya Cummings, who is the widow of the amazing Congressman Elijah Cummings, who has a brand new book coming out called We're Better Than This. These are words. There Maya is holding up the cover of the book. You can get it now. It is available wherever you buy books. It is the story of a remarkable life. Of a remarkable public servant who wrote this story really at the very end of his life in the last year. And it was an extraordinary year. So Maya, thank you so much for joining us. I know that we are about to have the 1-year anniversary of the Honorable Elijah Cummings' death. And, I know it's been quite a year for you. So condolences and blessings, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Caroline. It's just a pleasure to be with you today.
So tell me about this book. It's coming out at a critically important time, just before we elect a new president. And this book could have had a much longer timeline. I know you had to have rushed to get it out when you did. Why did you want to be certain that the book came out now?
Well, Elijah had a message to the American people that he wanted to make sure that they urgently received before this election season. And so now he's speaking to the grave, from the grave to the American people, warning them that they absolutely must not allow Donald Trump to get another term in office. Because Elijah believed with every fiber of his being that if Donald Trump got another term in office, we would no longer have a democracy. And so, Elijah's warning was a major part of this book. As you well know, he passed away as the chair of the House Reform and Oversight and Reform Committee. He saw every major investigation coming out of the Trump administration. It was his responsibility to steward these investigations, everything from the president's tax returns to the census question that turned out to be racist, to the children and the families at the border. All of these issues and investigations were actually under Elijah's purview. He saw the man, he took the measure of the man, he was disturbed by everything that he was seeing and what he knew, and he wanted to warn the American people that we're in danger. We are in danger if we allow him to take another term.
Your husband was known, for being incredibly dedicated to his work. And Nancy Pelosi writes a beautiful foreword in this book that really illuminates how, not just how impactful he was, but how tirelessly he worked at his role and for his district. And in the book, he shares a story of his first meeting with Donald Trump. And he wanted to talk to him about the cost of medication, right? And I thought it was interesting because one of Elijah Cummings' first jobs was working in a pharmacy, delivering medication in his local pharmacy as a kid growing up, right? And this was an area that he really cared passionately about, and he was concerned about what would happen to Obamacare under Trump and so forth. And he has this conversation with Donald Trump where it seemed that Trump was listening and that he was really engaged and that he was convinced even by your husband's passion for this. And then, of course, we know the president walked away from that conversation and proceeded to completely try to dismantle Obamacare and not care at all about the issues that your husband was really trying to persuade him around that day. And out of that, your husband decided, this man is not honorable, period. He's just not. He's not someone who has a word we can rely upon. He's not trustworthy. And he doesn't care about certain basic human needs. Why did your husband in his last year, he knew he was ill. He had been battling cancer for a very long time. and it had recurred. It's an extraordinary choice in, in a time when you don't know how much time you have, but you know it's going to be limited, to press as hard as he did, given the level of stress, given the physical demands. Why was that the choice that your husband made? And how was it for you to even allow him to do that, knowing what the potential toll would be on him?
So Elijah always took his duties seriously. He was, very responsible when it came to his positions, and this has always been the case. People who knew him at Howard said that he walked around campus with a briefcase and a suit on, suit and tie. He was a student body president. Then he, of course, became the chairman of the powerful House Government Oversight and Reform Committee, and he felt like it was his duty to warn the American people just as seriously as he took his position. You remember the 2016 election, how fraught that was, how odious it was. Elijah decided to forget all of that to try to establish a personal relationship with Donald J. Trump so that he could find a way to get things done for the American people. In this case, it was about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. He had seen too many people in his family, in his community, and certainly over his lifetime, who died unnecessarily or who lived with pain and suffering because they did not have the kind of care they needed or the access to the prescription drugs they needed. And he wanted to do everything in his power to see if he could work with this new president to get something done. Found out that he couldn't. And so with that, and with all the other investigations that came along, Elijah determined that the president suffered from an empathy deficit. He has an inability to actually feel other people's pain, to actually respect the position of other people. Elijah saw this up close and personal in terms of the crisis at the border and how the administration was treating the children and their families. And he felt like Donald Trump had a streak of cruelty in him that, if allowed to be unleashed by a second term in office, would be more horrendous than anything that we've seen thus far.
You mentioned the crisis at the border, and really that's where the title comes from, right? Your husband made a statement there, really imploring, not even talking to the president anymore, but imploring the rest of us, like, we are better than this. We are better than having families ripped apart as they enter this country and put into deplorable circumstances with no end in sight. What were the moments, in addition to that one, particularly in 2019, where you really saw your husband most deeply impacted by the actions of the White House or inactions of the White House?
So I think that there just were a number of them. The fact that the Trump administration had and still has a lawsuit before the Supreme Court seeking to invalidate the entirety of the Affordable Care Act means that they are willing, they're perfectly okay with, have no qualms about taking away health care from millions of Americans. And they have no other plan in place to fill the gap, which means that they're completely okay with human pain and suffering and unnecessary death. Now, since Elijah died in October, he died before the coronavirus hit, but he knew he would not have been surprised about how this administration actually did not respond to the coronavirus and all of the human devastation that's happened, 200,000 plus Americans, millions more around the world. And so with that, he knew, he saw it. And he implored the American people then, and he's imploring them now to know that, we're better than this. As long as we do better, we can be better, and we can make better decisions on behalf of our country, on behalf of our communities, and certainly on behalf of our families. One thing I did want to say is that, Elijah wanted to appeal to our better angels. He saw in his own lifetime how the American people from all different backgrounds came together to allow the civil rights movement legislation to become law. Now, it took the pressure of people like John Lewis and Elijah and many, many more people across the country to bring pressure to bear on the system, similar to what we're seeing today with Black Lives Matter. But they did it, and he saw the transformative power of change in his own life. And he wanted the American people to know, we've done it before as a nation, we can do it again.
You mentioned John Lewis, and we've lost so many giants since your husband passed, of course, he included. And I know that he and John Lewis were mistaken for each other oftentimes, and he talked about that in the documentary on John Lewis, where your husband is highlighted talking about that fact, that they were often mistaken for each other, and he took it as a compliment. But we have lost a lot of giants in this fight and in this struggle. And I'm curious to know, who was your husband looking to pick up the mantle? There's a lot of discussion, particularly in our community, around, where are the next big leaders? There are a lot of people stepping to the forefront, but the world is so different. There's so many voices speaking all at once. Your husband was so aware of his ebbing time. There's a lot of discussion in the book about hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, right? There was this driver for him and for his collaborator, and I'm sure you, like, we've got to get this in, got to get it in. Where did he see the possibilities? Where did he see the coming voices that would really matter for us?
So two things. I just want to say that in terms of this fall election, he wanted the American people to be the hero of this story. So, a lot of people came up to me after Elijah died and said, I'm sorry for your loss, but it's really our loss as a nation. And it's a baton that he wanted the American people to pick up and run with, that we all have a responsibility to defend and protect and preserve our democracy and make it better for future generations. And so in terms of this fall election, he wants everybody to vote, 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 vote. Vote, mobilize your networks. He didn't care about partisanship. He wanted, red states, blue states, Republicans, Democrats, independents, anybody and everybody of age to do and to execute their responsibility, their civic responsibility. Now, the second piece of this is that Elijah believes strongly in this new generation of voices who are coming out, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world, and the Ayanna Presleys of the world, because they're fierce voices. They're speaking on behalf of truth. They're speaking from a values-based place, just like Elijah did. And to be frank with you, when they came to the US Congress and most of the committee chairs did not want them on their committees, Elijah spoke to Nancy Pelosi and said, look, I want them on my committee. I'll take their youth. I'll take their vision. I'll take their voices. They'll be useful to me on my committee. And do you know that he took, I think, 3 or 4 of them, and they're all women, by the way. Yeah. And he mentored them, and they were all present at his ceremony on the Hill and at his funeral, and certainly I think that they all personally felt his loss.
Yeah, he was a mentor early in his life. I loved reading. There was so much that I learned about him from the book that I just didn't know. He had a heart for the underdog. And clearly one reason for that is that he had been an underdog. He was in special ed as a young child who ended up graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Howard University and going on to the University of Maryland Law School, obviously distinguishing himself over the course of a lifetime. You mentioned his desire for Americans to really find and use their voices. He talks very openly in the book about his own struggle to find his voice, even once he had a seat at the table, sort of hanging back and not saying how he felt and having to be encouraged that, no, your voice matters here. You have a unique experience and perspective that no one else can bring to this equation, right? And I thought it was really interesting, because I didn't know this, that there's a hidden figure who he illuminates in the book, Lena King Lee, who mentored him, the 3rd African-American woman to graduate from University of Maryland Law School, who was looking for someone to succeed her in politics. She was looking for a Black woman, couldn't find one. And your husband stood out because he was mentoring young Black people to pass the bar exam, because there were quotas then for how many of us could pass, how many of us could get into law school. And he had taken up this mantle personally to volunteer to try to get more Black lawyers, into the bar in the state of Maryland. So those things, his whole orientation toward women and leadership and youth, and the underdog and his openness toward that, how else did you see those things manifested in his career that really struck you in particular?
So it's so interesting because, I mean, personally, I met Elijah on the Hill. And what immediately struck me about him is that he was an incredible listener. I mean, he listened carefully, and he would remember what you said, and he would internalize it and contextualize it and act on it if it required it. And he was just an amazingly empathetic man. And so, in his own life, and he knew this very much, that, women poured into him. His mother, of course, was a preacher. He saw the evidence of his father being supportive of his mother's career aspirations. And he wasn't threatened by it. And Elijah himself wasn't threatened by women who were bold speaking, women of power, women of substance. He often told me that he was attracted to me because I reminded him of his mother. But you've got Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who was the woman who led Elijah and his pool mates to integrate a whites only pool when he was 11 years old. And she was the first ever African-American woman to earn a law degree in Maryland and to practice law in Maryland. Then Lena Kingley saw Elijah working hard to educate other attorneys about how to pass the bar. And she said to Elijah, she called him and she said, I'm sick, and I've been looking for a female attorney to take my place in the state legislature. And he said, I'll help you find one. And she was just like, no, you'll do. And so, he was flattered, and she poured her heart and soul into making sure he got elected and to have that position, helping him to raise money and helping him to make all the connections he needed. And then Nancy Pelosi, we cannot ignore Nancy Pelosi. Elijah considered Nancy Pelosi a mentor. She was responsible for helping to elevate him, by the way, bucking the seniority system, because there were other people ahead of Elijah to take the chairmanship of that committee. But with Nancy Pelosi's support, he was able to jump several positions to become the chair of that essential committee. She believed in him that much. She mentored him and she supported him, and he knew it. And he did the same for, I think, other women, just the young, the young ones that came in. Certainly he's never been one to be afraid of female leadership.
We're talking a lot about his sort of national profile and his impact on politics at the highest levels. But of course, in his heart, he was a Baltimore guy, and his district there, the 7th district, very, very close to his heart. It's a place that, he continued to stay completely rooted in. And it's a place that Donald Trump attacked very directly. And you can tell in the book when he recounts that story, when Donald Trump tweeted out using the infestation word, that very coded word that he has applied time and again to Black and brown communities. You could tell that it really hurt your husband. I mean, he was angry, of course, and he was outraged, but you could sense really just the devastation that he felt for the people in that community that he cared so much about. Can you talk about the 7th district and sort of your husband's lasting legacy there?
So Elijah was a son of Baltimore. Yes, this is a place that poured into him, that made him the man that who he was. Who received affirmation every 2 years through re-election to Congress. He was able to connect with people. And by the way, the 7th Congressional District has some of the wealthiest people in Maryland and some of the poorest people in Maryland. and certainly a concentration of poverty in Baltimore City. And yet all of these people knew and loved, respected and admired and supported Elijah, and he the same for them. He worked his darndest every single day. He was a hard worker. If anybody needed help, he was going to do his best to make sure that they got the help they needed. And so, with that, he loved the city of Baltimore and his people as much as we think about loving another person. That's how he felt about his city. And when the president did what he did, using the language of insects and infestation to describe the people of Baltimore, it hurt Elijah to his core, because it reminded him of the dehumanization that he went through as a child in a segregated, anti-Black, nation. The language that Donald Trump uses, by the way, is not just happenstance. It's the language of Hitler. It's the language that they used to actually dehumanize Jews during the Third Reich. And so when you invoke the language of dehumanization, equate people with insects, then it gives other people who feel that way permission. They feel like the authority to stomp on you like you're a bug. And certainly Elijah did not want the city of Baltimore or its residents in the 7th Congressional District to be treated as if they were any less American than any other American. And so it hurt him to his core. And, while he publicly was gracious under fire, he was privately in pain and agony.
He was always gracious under fire. I think that really comes through in the book. But, all that he endured, all of the stresses of the job, particularly during the last few years, clearly had an impact on him. What were the things that he would say in private that, that he would never say publicly, but that you were privy to?
In the last days, it was just, I've never heard him say so much that he was so tired. I'm just tired. I'm tired. And in fact, in the last days, he said he was ready to go. And I remember telling my pastor who came to visit us, I asked him to come, that, he can't just will himself to die. He can't. And yet, he was just insistent that he was tired. He was ready to go. I do think that the stress of the last few years of his life, of taking that position, the responsibility of battling and combating Donald Trump, took a toll. I do think that we would have been able to extend his life. I don't know how long, but certainly longer. But I do think that the concentrated stress of what he went through, I think, undermined his ability to rally, and certainly undermined his ability to continue. And so with that, we were graced and blessed with Elijah. He served as hard and as best as he could. And now he's still serving by giving his final message to the American people.
What do you most hope people will take away from this book? Because it gives us, a sort of behind the curtain look at the last few years, but particularly the last year of his life, right down to the very end, where I know his collaborator texted him about something having to do with the book and said, look at it tomorrow. And he passed away that night. And the writer noted that he read the text before he did pass away. So really down to the end, even though he was so tired, he was still, really wanting to do the work, particularly to get this book out. What is it that you want people most to take away from We're Better Than This?
Elijah wanted young people especially to take heart from his story, to see the arc of, a young man who was, the underdog, who was born into poverty, born into a society that considered African Americans undeserving, where he went to separate and unequal schools in his early years, where he was labeled special education, but he was able to rise. He was able to overcome. He was able to challenge. He was able to contest He was able to become a leader in his high school. He was able to graduate Phi Beta Kappa from Howard, all of the things that you mentioned earlier, rising to one of the highest positions in the land. And he was able to do it through by persistence, by using persistence, dedication, hard work, unyielding faith in his ability to overcome, and unyielding faith in God, because that was the undercurrent in all of this. And certainly, he wanted young people to take heart that you too can overcome these obstacles. And so we're actually working on a young adult version of this book so that middle schoolers can actually heed the lessons that Elijah shared.
I know that he has a quote in the book, and part of the book is dedicated, or the book is dedicated in part to the young people that you talk about. And there's this beautiful quote that's repeated a few times, actually, where he says, "Our children are the living messengers we send to a future we will never see." It's really beautiful. And of course, he was not able to see where we are now. And he will not physically be here to see the outcome of this election. But there is so much work that he did to be proud of, and that is lasting and helping to carry us into this moment and through these moments to the election. Was there something that he was proudest of?
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of things that he was proud of. He created a program here in Baltimore called the Elijah Cummings Youth Program, where they've now been in operation 20 years. They've graduated, more than 100 young people who have gone on to, not 100% of them have, graduated from high school. 95% of them have graduated from college. You've got some of them who are in the news media as anchors. You've got some of them who have created nonprofits. You've got some who are now running for office. So he has spawned a whole group of young leaders through this program. Elijah, there are a number of things that he worked on. One that I always focus on because it was so remarkable to me was his championing access to dental care for young poor people who are on Medicaid. And so, there was a Washington Post story about a young African-American Diamante driver who died because he had a tooth abscess where the infection in the tooth abscess went to his brain. And his mother could not find a Medicaid doctor who would take her child to actually do the dental service care for him. And he died. And Elijah took that on. When Elijah took it on, Maryland was 49th in the nation in terms of Medicaid dental care for young people. After Elijah got finished, they were #1. That's how dead serious he was in terms of making sure that access for the underdog was there. And so, I could go on. He has a number of accomplishments that are very important, I think. But one of the most important things I think that he should be remembered for was in this time of potential and looming tyranny. He stood in the gap to actually defend and become one of our staunchest protectors of our democracy, because he believed that strongly, that this form of government gives us the best opportunity to fight for our freedom and work towards a more perfect union.
Well, thank you for making sure that his story is told. It's told quite beautifully, and the title really says it all as we sit in this particular moment. We're better than this, and God willing, we will continue to get better as we move through this pandemic and through this election cycle. Maya Cummings, thanks so much for being here today. And God
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. I just really enjoyed the conversation. God bless you too.
Stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.